What do you think that blockchain companies should remember about in the first place when it comes to their marketing?
Thinking about marketing and then marketing well and then creating a brand are three different things. It is a real challenge in the space because there's already so many perceptions about a space which really isn't mature yet anyway. So you're building a product, you're building a company into a space that people more broadly don't really understand how it can be usefully applied. Everyone wants to be relevant, and so they might feel compelled to use the word decentralized in a prominent way in their messaging. But if everyone is saying it, then no one's really differentiated.
So how actually to stand out? Hello, my name is Sylvia Gorajek and welcome to Valley Talks. As always, we're super excited to be here at DocuSign today. In this third season, we're all about startup branding, and guess what we're going to unravel today? How to create a strong blockchain brand. My today's guest, Jesse Ratner, is a founder of San Francisco-based The Blockchain Agency and nearly 25 years veteran creative director and writer. He began his career writing taglines for Hollywood blockbusters like Saving Private Ryan, and later he was leading creative copies for tech giants like Google, Uber, Logitech, and others. Today, Jesse is helping high-growth blockchain companies properly navigate their stories. Jesse, thanks so much for joining me on Valley Talks.
Thank you. It's really great to be here.
I'm super glad. And you know, blockchain, although it's been out there for at least a few years, it's become popular only recently, right? And I think there is still a lot of education to be done, and you know, people need to just have a little bit better idea of what blockchain really is. What do you think that blockchain companies should remember about in the first place when it comes to their marketing?
Well, it's a really good question, and it's a question I think a lot of folks are trying to answer now that the blockchain is more well known. If you mention the word blockchain, or especially Bitcoin, to someone on the street, they have an idea of what it is. So the challenge in the first place to answer your question, I think, is knowing where you are in your growth as a company. Often, for example, very early stage companies, founders, and if they have a marketer, they're focused on raising money, right? So that first marketing effort is going to be going into the pitch deck and the initial marketing assets that they want to create to get the word out.
Yeah.
And so often I've seen founders really want to rush into that because they have to, and I completely empathize with that. Mm-hmm. Even in the case of a traditional company like Google or IBM that might be, or that are definitely interested in the technology, I think there's a challenge to educating your target audience and knowing them really well and what their pain points are, but also educating the market, because as a category, as a concept, people really don't understand what it means. I can give you an example. Mm-hmm. When I told my mom that I was working with a blockchain company, private wealth on the blockchain company called Bancoris, first thing she said was, "Oh, that's Bitcoin. That's the dark web. That's something not that. You don't want to be associated with that, Jesse." And I think that's a standard sort of mainstream sort of early majority, late majority response.
Everyone was also even scared of the internet, weren't they?
Exactly.
And so don't put your name out there. By no means put out your photo out there, right? Even I remember when my parents told me first about the internet, you could play games with your uncle in another town, and was like, how come is that? And so they were excited about that point, but then they also would say, just, you know, don't put out too much information out there because it is dangerous. You can get, you know, viruses and all that. So right. I think aren't we going through the same kind of era right now with the blockchain, you think?
We are. We're in the very earliest stages of creating the understanding of what the blockchain is, what it can do, what are the applications, what are the useful applications, what are the applications that maybe are useful but not for 5 or 10 years. And I think what you're seeing is the challenge of that early stage. And so there's a credibility challenge because Bitcoin has been around for 10 years now. And so there's a need for companies to break through not only their own need to establish themselves as a company and what they're offering and their value prop, but also educate the market a little bit.
And you think that some of them don't really remember about that in the beginning?
No, I wouldn't assume that any founder who has enough gumption and has a great idea and has brought together talent and is starting to raise money is forgetting about marketing. Because there's really only two essential things you have to do when you have a company, right? You have to innovate and create a product, and you have to create a customer, you have to market to them. So I'm certain that every blockchain company is thinking about marketing. But thinking about marketing and then marketing well and then creating a brand are three different things. And if you haven't done that, then you're allowing the market to kind of define who you are.
Yeah, and that's the worst.
That could be problematic unless you have an awesome product, right?
Yeah. So how actually to stand out? Because yes, they are doing some sort of communication. Sometimes it is well thought through. Sometimes it's quite random. But still, what we can see in most of those blockchain companies that they are using the word decentralized all the time.
Yeah.
And so they want to stand out by using that word because this is new, but then if everyone is saying the same, you don't really stand out. Like, how can they stand out in a different way?
It's a great question. Just using the right buzzword is not going to create a brand, and it's not necessarily going to drive business results. There's a dynamic, there's a tension always between being relevant and being differentiated. And so in the blockchain space, everyone wants to be relevant, and so they might feel compelled to use the word decentralized in a prominent way in their messaging. But if everyone is saying it, then no one's really differentiated.
We see now pretty much everywhere a decentralized social network, decentralized pharmacy, decentralized like anything, right? So it sounds like they can just find a focus onto something even more deep than that.
I don't think the question is should you or should you not use the word. It's who are you as a company. If decentralization is key to your business strategy, then how do you educate your target audience in the market about why it's valuable? I was working on a team at Google for 5 years, and at one point I was on a project and we were working with a fairly well-known behavioral economist. And we had this really interesting creative idea that we wanted to present to the marketers there. I worked for an agency and we were presenting to the marketers. And the marketers looked to this behavioral economist and said, "What do you think?" And he said, "I don't know. You need to try it."
Yeah.
A lot of things we don't really know what the
Right.
effects are going to be. And you don't know what you don't know. So I think it's good practice to really have a strategy that allows for a lot of testing, allows you to see, what's right.
What about some video assets when it comes to marketing in blockchain? Because what I've observed a lot is that they do a lot of explainer videos, animated videos with a lot of infographics. I imagine it's probably the easiest way for them to explain the processes, but also at the same time, by now, it looks like those videos are kind of repetitive, or at least from the visual point of view, they're kind of similar. What do you advise in this case?
It's a great question. I think it's very true that many explainer videos in the blockchain space look very similar. And I think there's probably good reasons why folks are choosing an animated approach to video. Often they're talking about ideas that aren't actually in existence yet. There's no UI. So you want to kind of dramatize that story in an effective way. Animation is useful. But I think, as in everything with brand, there's this concept of if folks are going this way, you go that way, right?
Yeah.
When they zig, you zag, and there's a famous kind of school of thought around that.
Yeah, there are many formats.
Yeah.
Other formats also to choose from. We could pretty much just make even a live action video that would just promote what's the outcome of of using the product, right? So it doesn't need to be animated.
I agree, and I think also the animation typically solves one problem. It presents the problem, and it presents the company and their service as the solution. But I think there's also lots of creative approaches to getting the story out there. There's interviewing people that are going to be using the application. There are any number of other ways I think to tell the story using video.
I feel like the education part in the blockchain space is always going to follow. I mean, not always, but at least for the next few years, going to follow us quite closely because it does depend who you're talking to. And if you're talking to consumers, you probably have to use the whole different language than you do to investors, let's say, or to partners. What are your observations from your experience? How blockchain companies are using their language? Is it like a correct language they're using right now? Have they learned throughout the last year, let's say, when it's become more mainstream?
It's a great question. And as someone who's running an agency who's looking to really help clients tell their story, I think, of course, there's all these really basic truths about who we are that often companies lose sight of, especially early stage companies that are often founded by product guys, because they're very close to the product, and they're so close to the product, they see the features and they see all the bells and whistles, and it's really hard to draw back and say, oh, the reason I'm building this amazing spaceship is not because there's 100 dials, because we're going to the moon. And I think, so the headline is, we're going to the moon, let's go to the moon. But yeah, there's 100 dials, and I think often companies really want to talk about their features. They want to talk about how fast things go and how big they are, and how, but the challenge is really elevating the story to, well, why should I really care?
Yeah, the question is why.
Yeah.
Right? The golden question, which actually applies to any industry, not only the more traditional ones, but just as well to blockchain.
Exactly.
Correct? So that's the most common mistake that you notice in blockchain companies also doing, or is there anything else that you would bring up?
The most common mistake?
Yeah.
I don't think that mistake or that challenge is particular to the blockchain space. I think any business has the challenge of really speaking in a clear language to their audience in a way that's effective.
Yeah.
I think
for blockchain it may be even harder, I guess, only, right?
I think so, and mainly that's because of the state of the space. It is a real challenge in the space because there's already so many perceptions about a space which really isn't mature yet anyway. So you're building a product, you're building a company into a space that people more broadly don't really understand how it can be usefully applied. Yeah. So you have the twin challenge of building the brand for your company, but also being in a space which is still so nascent and so noisy and unclear.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and that's where you come
too.
in.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to.
Jesse, thanks so much for sharing all of your knowledge and experience on Valley Talks.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.